إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. قال الله تعالى في القرآن المجيد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ما أصاب من مصيبة إلا بإذن الله ومن يؤمن بالله يهد قلبه والله بكل شيء عليم. Dear brothers and sisters, we begin by praising Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We send peace and blessings upon Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, upon his companions, and upon all those who have treaded in their footsteps of righteousness and piety. We ask Allah that Allah make us from those who adopt the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah, and that Allah make us from those who have love for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and for the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ameen. Dear brothers and sisters, the difficulties and hardships that we face in our lives, whether they be in a private aspect or whether they be on a public scale, difficulties and hardships are intended to be a wake-up call. Along with a wake-up call, they also bring in new responsibilities for us as Muslims. As Muslims, in every given situation, during every occasion, we have a certain set of responsibilities. And that's the beauty of our deen. The beauty of our deen is that it teaches us what we're responsible for. It teaches us the roles we have to play, and that's what it encourages us to focus on, instead of saying this person should have done that or that person should have done this. But nevertheless, in the past few months, if we take a closer look, we'll notice that the environment has been acting a little strange. There have been many natural catastrophes, many natural disasters. And with the occurrence of these natural disasters, we see that our lives as human beings have dramatically been impacted. Whether we've been, whether it has affected us directly or not, we see that it has taken some sort of toll on us. Right? Just to name and go over a few of these catastrophes and disasters that have taken in the past couple of months. Just a few weeks ago, October 10th, which is not too long ago, in California there were a number of wildfires. And because of these wildfires, you had 3,500 buildings that were destroyed. Right? Imagine 3,500 homes and buildings being completely burnt because of these wildfires. More than 20,000 people were evacuated from their homes, and officials ordered whole cities to evacuate. Imagine, one day we're just told that you have to leave the city. If you stay, you're going to die, and you're going to leave, and there's no guarantee that you're going to come back to what you own or what you have. Imagine that. That's October 10th. Then we look at September 19th, the earthquake in Mexico, a major earthquake, 7.1 magnitude, right? And it left 2.5 million people in need of aid and assistance. Then we look at, August 25th, Hurricane Harvey in Texas. We know how catastrophic that was. That there were 203,000 homes, right? 203,000 homes that were damaged by this hurricane, right? And there were 12,700 homes that were completely destroyed, right? Then you had Hurricane Irma that hit August 30th in Florida and in the Bahamas and Cuba and those areas. Well, what's the point of all this? In the past couple of weeks, this has been just ongoing. Natural disaster after disaster after disaster. With that in mind, how do we as Muslims, number one, respond to all this? And number two, what are our duties as Muslims? What are our responsibilities? Right? Because we have some sort of responsibility. Just because we have not been afflicted directly doesn't mean that we can just sit back and relax. So two things we have to keep in mind. How do we as Muslims reflect and respond to this? And number two, what are our responsibilities as believers? And inshallah, we'll go through each one. To begin with, how should we approach and react to these circumstances, these situations? You know, you turn on the TV and you listen to the weather channel and whatnot, and as the weatherman is reporting that, this is how the weather is going to be, so on and so. The first thing that comes to mind, and this is human nature, the first thing that comes to mind is that, this is just the causing of the winds or because of some sort of natural occurrence. It's all natural. And we completely leave Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of the equation. We're Muslims. We believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We believe that Allah is the one who is in control of the winds. Allah is in control of all the natural disasters and occurrences. We know that Allah is in full control of it. We know that Allah is the one who allows these natural disasters to occur. But on a day-to-day basis, in the society and in the context that we live in, we naturally, out of neglect, leave out Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from that equation. And because we leave Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out from that equation, it doesn't wake us up. It doesn't give us that reminder. It doesn't make us face reality. Rather we say, oh, we just need to clean up our energy system a bit more. Or we need to recycle a bit more. We look at changes that we need to do right in front of us. Immediate changes. But we forget the fact that all this is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We forget the reality of it, that this is a wake-up call from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's the first thing we need to keep in mind as Muslims, that when we are afflicted or we see other people that are afflicted with these natural disasters, the first thing that we should keep in mind as believers is the ayah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, مَا أَصَابَ مِن مُصِيبَةٍ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. There is no catastrophe, there is no disaster. Musibah, it's interesting the word where musibah comes from, right? And this ayah in itself, the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts it is just very interesting linguistically. Allah says, ma asaba. Musibah is from the very root words of asaba. So asaba and musibah, they come from the same root word. And asaba means to afflict, to strike. Musibah, which we know as something, a catastrophe, a disaster, something unfortunate, an unfortunate event. The scholars, they mentioned the correlation between the two is that a disaster, an unfortunate event will not strike anyone except without the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If something horrible were to happen to someone, if someone were to go through unfortunate events, it's only because Allah had wanted it to happen. Meaning it strikes its target, right? We don't believe in luck. We don't believe that, because a certain bad thing happened to someone, that they're just unlucky. It was just a matter of chance. It's not a matter of chance. It's not because of luck. It's because Allah wanted it to happen. And that's the first thing we need to keep in mind. مَا أَصَابَ مِن مُصِيبَةٍ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. There is no calamity or affliction that strikes except with the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَن يُؤْمِن بِاللَّهِ يَهْدِ قَلْبَهُ وَاللَّهُ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عَلِيمٌ. And those who believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, يَهْدِ قَلْبَهُ, Allah will guide their hearts. وَاللَّهُ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عَلِيمٌ. And Allah is the one who is all aware. If we keep this in mind, and if we approach these situations with this in mind the next time we're faced with this situation, the way we respond and the way it affects us will be very different, right? You have one person who looks at all these things that are going on in our country, in our world, right? And they say to themselves, it's because it's because of all the pollution, it's because we don't recycle enough, it's because the government isn't doing enough, or it's because of all these climate change deniers, or whatever it may be, right? And we're just so focused on that. And we make these small changes in our homes, we start recycling more, right? You have that one person. And then you have this other person who understands that all this is there's natural causes behind it. That's the system of this world. That Allah has put systems in this world. That when you see clouds, it's an indication that it will rain. Right? When you see lightning, when you see lightning or thunder, it's an indication of a storm approaching. These are the systems Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put into place. But this person has the foresight to see beyond the system. Just like how a believer knows that the system in this world is that you go to work and you get paid. If you don't work, you're not going to get paid, no matter how much dua you make. But the believer also knows that behind all this, there's another reality. And that reality is that Allah is the provider, that Allah is Ar-Razaq, Allah is the one who sustains us. Likewise, when we see these calamities occur, when we see these disasters, there's obviously the reality, the tangible reality of it, right? The reality that we can observe, that because of these dynamics that are taking place in nature, that these natural disasters are occurring. But as believers, we have to have much more foresight than that. As believers, we have to be able to see beyond that. We have to be able to see beyond what's tangible. We have to see the reality of it, the final and ultimate reality, which is it's in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's in the control of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it only happens because of the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when a person is able to realize that and approach every situation like that, not just good, not just the bad, but also the good, that whatever good happens is only through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then their connection and relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will increase. Then as we mentioned early on, that when these calamities happen, the purpose of these calamities are to bring us back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the only way it will bring us back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we realize that these are signals and calls from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we forget that, then it will not have that effect of bringing us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Secondly, what we have to understand is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala operates and controls this world however He wants it to, right? So as believers, we don't question Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decisions. As believers, we don't ask, why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala choose to do this? As believers, we simply accept. And as we mentioned right in the beginning of the khutbah, that our deen emphasizes and focuses on our responsibilities. And it discourages us from looking for other people to blame, right? So when these natural disasters and occurrences happen, as believers, one of the du'as which Rasulullah ﷺ would read during the morning and evening, one of the du'as which is recommended and is prescribed as a sunnah is رضيت بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا وبمحمد صلى الله عليه وسلم نبيا. That I am pleased with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I am pleased with Islam being my deen, and I am pleased with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam being the messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a core aspect of our deen, that we are completely pleased with whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decided for us. Not just for us, but everything around us. Right? We don't question the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We do not question the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because we all know what happened when the angels questioned the decision of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In Surah Al-Baqarah, where the angels, and this was all, the entire scheme was put into place so that we can derive benefit and learn a lesson. That Allah put it in the angels, Allah inspired the angels that they would ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala why Allah decided to create human beings. And then Allah proved them, or Allah showed them exactly why. And Allah made a statement after that that I know what you don't know, right? And that's the reality of it. That we know only so much, and Allah knows everything. In order to even say everything it's an understatement, because it's not really possible for us to grasp exactly how much Allah knows, or the infinite amount of knowledge and wisdom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has. But as believers, we simply accept it. We don't question why or how come. This is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we accept it, and we take responsibility. We take responsibility in the sense that we play our part. We do our role in doing whatever it needs to be done. And we'll get to that inshallah. There's a few ahadith that we'd like to mention before we move forward. This hadith, which has been narrated by Zayd radiallahu anhu, he mentions that one night it rained, and the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam led the Sahaba in the Fajr prayer, and this was in Hudaybiyah. And after completing it, he turned around and said to the Sahaba radiallahu anhum that, "Do you know what your Lord has said?" So the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, out of their respect and love for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they said, Allah and His Messenger know best. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to them, "Some of my slaves get up believing in me and others disbelieving in me. Those who say we have been given rain through Allah's mercy, choice and Allah's blessing, then he is a believer in me and has rejected the stars. And whoever said we have been given rain because of such and such star, then he is a believer in this star and has rejected me." Right? What we learn from this hadith is that during the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there were people who believed that these natural occurrences, right, rain, wind or storms or whatever it may be, they were because of a certain star or because of a certain natural phenomena, whatever it may be. Right? That was their intrinsic belief. That it was because of that. They did not associate it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the hadith is saying is that a true believer is the one who can see beyond all these things, right? A true believer is the one that can see beyond the tangible aspects and face reality and understand that all this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now we have to be very clear, and we've mentioned this already, that this is not to say we reject or deny the natural sciences or the natural phenomena that take place, right? As we mentioned, that these are the systems Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put into place. But this is only what we can observe. Beyond it is the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and everything happens with the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But moving forward, there's a very beautiful hadith that we'd like to share. And this hadith, narrated by Imam Tirmidhi rahmatullahi alayhi, narrated by Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, he mentions that when a number of things begin to happen, right, when a number of things begin to happen, then we will see that natural disasters will increase. Before we go on to the hadith, one thing we have to mention is that, yes, these natural disasters, they happen because Allah they're a reminder for us, but they also become prevalent when we as human beings begin to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on a mass scale. When we begin to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continuously and to the extent where it becomes abnormal, where it becomes, the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala becomes rampant, that's when these natural disasters also become prevalent. And this is a moment where we need to look back and reflect. So the hadith, it mentions that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, when the possession of others will be regarded as personal property, right? When you steal, when theft becomes prevalent, when trust will be treated like, when trust will be violated, right? There's no sense of trust anymore, right? You tell someone, I'll do this for you, and you never do it. When zakah will be regarded as a burden, meaning to discharge zakah will become difficult, right? That people don't want to give zakat anymore, right? When learning will be acquired for other than a religious purpose. That we seek the knowledge of the Quran and Sunnah, not so that we can get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but so that we can argue with one another. So that we can show people, this is how much I know. So that we can have some sort of standing or some sort of authority in the community. When a man will be considerate towards his wife and uncaring towards his mother. He brings his friends near and drives his father far off. Right? In other words, when we begin to treat our parents like second-class citizens, right? Our friends come before our friends. Our friends come before our parents, right? That we always give preference to our friends. Our parents are, second class, or our parents come last, right? Or that when we're married, that we give preference to our spouses over our parents. We have to understand that when we get married, we have a responsibility. But that does not mean that now our responsibility towards our parents have been foregone. Our parents still come on top, and then it's our spouses. And each one has their own set of responsibilities that we have. And our deen is beautiful because the responsibilities and the rights of our spouses are not intended to cross the rights and responsibilities of our parents. And if they do cross, then it's our job, as whether it be the husband or the wife, to make sure that we strike that balance. That if we see our parents violating the rights of our spouse, then we have to speak to our parents. On the other hand, if we see our spouses violating the rights of our parents, we have to speak to our spouses. Right? That balance has to be there. And then it says, when the voices will be raised in the masjid, when arguing and yelling and shouting will become prevalent in the masjid no longer becomes a place where we come to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And beyond this, it shows that there's a lot of disunity in the community. That people gather in the masjid, and instead of cooperating with one another, they're always arguing, they're always yelling at one another. There's a lot of disunity. Not disagreements, a lot of disunity, that they just don't like one another, right? When the most impious will become leaders, right? When the most, the wretched people will become the leaders of our communities and our nations, right? The worst people will become the leaders of our nations. When the leader of a people will be the most worthless amongst them, right? Even if they have billions of dollars, right? They're worthless. When a person will be honored merely out of fear for his evil. When singing and musical instruments will become widespread. When liquor will be consumed. When the latter generations of this ummah will curse the former ones, right? And you see this very prevalent, where people read a few things and they learn a few things, and all of a sudden they feel that the scholars of the past didn't know anything. Now that I have Google at the tips of my fingers, I know everything, right? I can pull up anything I want. Or we see this very common with the upcoming generation, where all the blame is being thrown on the previous generation. Oh, we're suffering because of the previous generation, so on and so forth, right? Where the latter generations of this ummah will begin to curse the former ones. So when this becomes prevalent, what happens? The hadith of Rasulullah says, when all this becomes prevalent, then await violent winds, earthquakes, people being swallowed up by the earth, disfigurement, pelting rains from the sky, and other signs which will follow one after another, like beads of a necklace following one after another when the string is cut. Right? We began this khutbah by mentioning a few of the natural disasters that took place. And if you remember the dates, they were just 1 week from one another. October 10th, then September 25th, September 30th, and then August, just a few weeks from one another. And we have to ask ourselves that this entire list of things which Rasulullah has mentioned, how much of, number one, is that prevalent? Of course they are, right? We're just reading through these things, and it's so prevalent. But as we mentioned, as Muslims, we have to take responsibility. How much of these things are we involved in? How are we related to these kind of things? What are we doing to influence these sort of behaviors? That's what we have to ask, right, as Muslims. So going back to the way we began, that as Muslims, when we see all these things happening, we have to ask ourselves, how far are we from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And number two, that these evil actions which has been mentioned by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, are they in our lives? What do we need to do in order to change ourselves? Because the reality of it is that we cannot change the world, right? That's the reality of it. We can't change the world. We can't change everyone. And we've been speaking about this very same topic for the past 2 or 3 weeks now, right? That we can't change everyone around us. But what we can do is we can change ourselves, we can change our families, and we can change the people that we interact with. And that's the sort of responsibility that we have as Muslims. Right? So we addressed that when these natural disasters take place, how do we respond to them? Right? We respond to them by associating to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that at the end of the day, it's Allah that's in control of all these things. And number two, that as Muslims, how do we take responsibility for it? We take responsibility for these kind of things by becoming better Muslims, by becoming closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because these are all wake-up calls for a Muslim. For a believer, this is another opportunity to reflect and get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is another opportunity for a believer to understand that our lives are really not in our controls, right? Within our control. That if there's a natural disaster that has to take place today, how much control do we really have over our lives? No matter how much wealth we have, no matter how much authority or power we have, no matter how fortified or protected our buildings are, when these natural disasters strike, they don't discriminate. They don't care how much money you have. They afflict everyone. And that makes a person realize that really how much worth do I have in front of everything. And number two, how much control do I really have? And that our existence in this world is really just temporary. SubhanAllah. So may Allah allow us to understand, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from these difficulties and these disasters. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala assist and have mercy on all the people that have been afflicted. May Allah have mercy on their families. May Allah grant them patience and strength. Ameen. بارك الله لنا ولكم في القرآن المجيد ونفعنا وإياكم بالآيات والذكر الحكيم أستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروا إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله وكفى بالله شهيدا ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله قال الله تعالى في القرآن المجيد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد عبدك ورسولك وصل على المؤمنين والمسلمات وبارك على محمد وعلى أزواجه وذريته أما بعد. Dear brothers and sisters, we mentioned that with these difficulties and disasters, there comes a set of responsibilities, that it's a reminder for us, and we are responsible for changing ourselves and our families and the people that we come into direct contact with. But there's another responsibility that we as believers have. The hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and this is a lengthy hadith which we will not go into completely, but it's on the day of judgment Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask that Allah will be speaking to a person on the day of judgment, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say to this person, I was ill and you did not visit me. Right? So imagine Allah will be saying to this person, Yabna Adam, maridtu falam ta'udni, that I was sick but you didn't visit me. And then this person will say to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Rabb, kayfa a'uduka, that how would it be possible for me to visit you? Right? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes through different scenarios, that I was hungry, you did not feed me. Right? That I needed food, you didn't give me food. I needed clothing, you didn't provide me with clothing. Right? Allah will ask these things to the person. And the person will say, how is it possible for me to visit you, or how is it possible for me to feed you, or how is it possible for me to give you clothing, whereas you are the one who's taking care of all of us, whereas you are the one who gives us cure, you're the one who has given us life. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say that the people, right, and it will be best to actually just narrate, to read the actual hadith. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَمَا عَلِمْتَ أَنَّهُ إِسْتَطْعَمَكَ عَبْدِي فُلَانٌ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say that, do you not remember that there was once a person who was asking you for food, فَلَمْ تُطْعِمْهُ, and you did not feed them. And then he says, أَمَا عَلِمْتَ أَنَّكَ لَوْ أَطْعَمْتُهُ لَوَجَدْتَ ذَلِكَ عِنْدِي, that he's like, don't you understand that if you fed this person, you would have found me there? In reality, right, meaning it's a good deed, right? So what we learn from this hadith is that when people are suffering, right, we may not be directly afflicted with these natural disasters, but we know people that are, right? They're in the other part of the country. They're not too far from us. As Muslims, we have a responsibility to help them, right? We may not be able to go there physically and help them clean up and whatnot, but we can donate a few dollars here and there to assist them. That's our responsibility as well. And that's something we can't neglect. Because on the Day of Judgment, just like how in this example, in this hadith, Allah is asking this person that I asked you for food, but you never gave it to me. Allah may ask us on the Day of Judgment that I asked you for shelter, I asked you for food, I asked you for clothing, and you never gave it to me. And we don't want to be in the same situation as this person, where we say to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that, how would we have fed you? And Allah gives us countless a list of examples of all the people that are suffering and going through difficulty, and that we just sat back and relaxed and said, it's not my problem, right? I'm here, right? I'm fine. It's their problem, right? That's not the way a Muslim or a believer approaches these situations. When these situations happen, it's an opportunity for us. It's an opportunity for us to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to help the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because when we help the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also realize, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the tawfiq to do whatever we can to help these people. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as you mentioned, make it easy for them. آمين. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون فاذكروا الله يذكركم واشكروه ولا تكفرون جزاكم الله خير أقيموا الصلاة